Dimitri, how you doing?
Good, good evening. I've been thinking about uh, Oswald Spengler and the Faustian spirit of Western civilization.
Ooh.
Have you heard about Spengler?
Oh yes.
Yeah, he's. I would describe him as like Hegel wrote the philosophy of history. Of course, a very spiritual sense. Of course, some people, like some French philosophers, see Hegel's phenomenology of spirit itself as Hegel's philosophy of history.
Hmm.
But I would describe Spengler as like Hegel on psychedelics with like a layer of Nietzsche on top of it. That's what it would be. He believes that there's a kind of a Western soul and a Chinese soul which go through these different kinds of stages. And he wrote Der Untergang des Abendlandes. That's his magnum opus, consists of two books, and the Abendlandes are like the evening land is what like how he describes the West. So it's
Hmm.
America and Europe, and yeah, he believes the West has gone through this that there's like that the sun is setting, that it went through its greatest period, and he's not completely pessimistic, but he believes there's this kind of Faustian spirit in
Hmm.
the West, which is a kind of penetrative spirit. You know, the Americans always want to get further into like the land or like to the moon or then now to Mars. So this is like reminiscent of like you want to sublate space,
Hmm.
basically. You want to make space not a factor. And yeah, surely it is very interesting. However, I think that like the way he talks about the Faustian soul is yeah, it's yet another like mythical configuration of what I believe psychoanalysis gets quite right with the logic of the phallus.
Hmm.
This idea of being this kind of exception to universality, like the primal father constitutes the exception to the mass of castrated men, something like this. This kind of logic where you exempt yourself from the picture. That's phallic logic, according to Lacan, for example. And I believe yeah, Spengler has like a mythical historical construction in his books that's based on this kind of logic. But the reason I'm interested in him is not just randomly. It's because I came to know and getting to know a Dutch philosopher who's very much influenced by Spengler. And something that interests me especially in Spengler is that, of course, Hegel talked about the end of art, the end of religion. And for Hegel, basically, the goal of religion, art, and philosophy is the same, which is reconciliation that sets you up to create the future anew, which is, of course, like this reconciliation precedes your decision making, as you've described it similarly with the absolute choice, like and the paradox of its grounding, of its self-grounding, let's say. So in the ancient world, it was art which could provide that kind of revolutionary, emancipatory catharsis of reconciliation. But Hegel believes we have passed beyond that stage, and that also Christianity has first served its function with bringing us from like the Roman world to the Reformation to the Enlightenment. Now, in the Enlightenment, what changes is that for Hegel, it's actually the era of philosophy. So it's philosophy that, with the Enlightenment, brings about change, not in a uh, direct sense, but it holds the space for theory to set us up for the reconciliation. Now, where Spengler comes in, and this is where like there's a deep link between Spengler and Heidegger too, is that Spengler basically believes in what Hegel calls the end of religion, but says now we live in like a technical economic gestell, or like a technical economic, yeah, how do you like technical economic predominance, right? So, and we can see this, of course, with a lot of thinkers, the death of God, Nietzsche, and Heidegger, of course, talks about techniques and stuff like this. So it really, yeah, I haven't read read enough Spengler to say, but I'm curious to what he would think about philosophy bringing about change. And Spengler was actually, he sounds very obscure. He sounds like maybe proto-Nazistic, the downfall of the fatherland. But actually, he was very much anti-Nazism. He also did some very interesting predictions which came true. For example, he lived during the 30s, right? And he had like tens of thousands of people who would buy his books and read him. So he was very popular during that time. But he predicted that communism wouldn't see the end of the century, of the 20th century, and that, of course, came to fruition. There's also another prediction. Maybe I will remember it later. But yeah, definitely a thinker worth getting into. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. I appreciate you sharing all that.
I'll just
Please.
before to connect it all around, because I'm reading this book by the Dutch philosopher, which is again being censored by the Platonic heaven. But yeah, no, like this guy writes about something very similar to belonging again. The sense that there has been this loss of the soul, like yeah, there is a sense in which the culture has been hollowed out by techniques and economics, and that we can in fact belong again. Like this is a basic claim that you and him make, that you can actually belong again, which is already like something, honestly, to be honest, like quite radical, because many people would just like fall into cynicism and not even believe that such a venture would be worth pursuing. But no, like I think this is it's a good project to go for it and strive for it and try to see how in culture do we go about this, and like something like philosophy here is very interesting, but I think art too can mean something here. It's not like what I said before, that art is over and that it's basically become useless or anything.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that, Mr. Thomas Jockin. Is good to see you. Thank you. And I must say, Spengler is fast. I know Dr. Niebenhauser has done work on Spengler and talked about the Faustian bargain and different things. And it is very interesting. Everyone always critiques any big picture or big theory of history or any broad categorization. That's just kind of popular today for intellectuals to say we're beyond that. But, there are some books on generational thinking, like Neil Strauss. He wrote a book called Generations. And I find it quite convincing. That shows that history tends to follow kind of a generational logic. Neil House, I believe his name. He's the guy who came up with the fourth turning idea. And that's a kind of popular idea. But actually, I really like and much prefer his 1991 analysis of how generations tend to form. If you go through history, you tend to start with a generation that's very exploratory. There's this kind of revival and hope and spirit. Then the next generation tends to be more, well, let me take, no, it's more like you start with a religious conversion, I believe, and this could entirely be wrong, but I believe it's a religious conversion. Then you have a sort of like new explorative spirit of people like, yeah, let's try some new stuff. Then you get the complacency where people kind of live off the fruits of the last generation. And then you get basically nihilism. And then nihilism leads to a giant war or some sort of economic downturn. And then there's a religious religious upheaval, and then it kind of returns. And look, they go through history and they show you in America, Europe, like how it tends to follow this 4-generational trend. And of course, there are exceptions, but you do tend to see Great Awakening, then the prosperity, then Civil War. Civil War leads to Reconstruction. Then you have the 1920, like he goes through, and you see these kind of cycles. Now, again, they're not determinists in this way, but there seems to be a law of numbers almost that tends to apply. And it's pretty fascinating. I find it interesting.
Is this not like isn't this like a kind of different way of wording Hegel's theory of history, that there's a necessity to war exactly because of the reason you just mentioned? Like citizens get like this self-satisfaction of nihilism and
belonging again to yes, absolutely. Belonging again to ends up reading Generations alongside Hegel and Dietrich McCloskey and different people and looking at this while simultaneously asking, okay, is this determinism? Because that's why I'm reading Splowski and determinism and all this different stuff, because then you also have very clear evidence that the idea of freedom in the 18th century is what led to the Great Enrichment, which then you have to do this weird thing where you say, well, they were forced to believe that idea due to environmental so I am like, I sometimes think the mistake of the hard determinist is not including ideas as part of the environment, because ideas are part of your environment. I always have a voice in my head and they impact my action. And you see, they only include material factors in the environment, which of course tend to be stronger than ideas on human behavior. But I can look at that bookcase and think of an elephant. This is what I would need. I need to see proof that that thought of thinking of an elephant while looking at that bookcase was determined. If they could show me that, I would be convinced. But it seems like when you look at a bookcase, you can think of Dr. Seuss, elephant, Final Fantasy X. I can just keep going. And Final Fantasy X could remind me to go play the PlayStation right now. Was that determined? It would seem like a stretch to say so. The problem is that ideas are part of your environment, not just material causes. Now I have a million more things. For me, the Lisbeth experiment that shows that they can predict when you press a button before you have conscious awareness just shows there's no subject-object divide. Not that we don't have free will. It just shows that we can, well, look, another thing I would say is I bet you there's more conscious awareness when a truck driver first starts driving a truck. The brain is probably very aware, and then after 40 years, they probably can do it on autopilot. Like, this is, I think, like, basically that Lisbeth experiment just shows that adults, when they get older, are able to do very basic functions of the body without thinking about it. I'd love to see that Lisbeth experiment with children or like infants or different things, right? So I have a lot of things to say on this, but the main thing with Spengler that's very interesting is when you compare the West, I actually bring up determinism because when I think of the Faustian bargain, the Faustian bargain the West may have made is the subject-object divide, actually, which has given us a kind of objectivity, technical thinking, technology, science. Obviously, the East has science, but there's like this harder subject-object divide. And determinism is just like, yeah, the object is in control, and the subject can do nothing because the object is completely in control. And the Faustian bargain of that subject-object divide that has gotten the West in trouble is then they're in a little Kafka story of the little fable in a hallway and you can't turn around, and now you're going to a place where the subject is completely just a force of they have no freedom or something like that. Now I'd have to elaborate on that, but it's fascinating when you compare that with, say, Japanese philosophy. We were just talking about In Praise of Shadows. We can obviously get into Nishishanti and Religious and Nothingness, where there's a real emphasis on there not being a subject-object divide. Like for Nishishanti and Religion and Nothingness, he really emphasizes that the water is just as much part of the fish as the fish is of the water. You can't even think of the functionality of the fish without that. Obviously, In Praise of Shadows, there's the notion that we condition our environments to create the possibility of things like shadows. You can even talk about rainbows that are only possible because the subject is in relation with the environment, right? And so you have this questioning about, now here's the thing though, when you have a hard subject-object divide, that seems to be great for the economy, seems to be great for technology, seems to be great for industry, and if you get a subject slash where they're kind of in a Leibniz situation, that seems to be something that creates more balance with the environment, maybe holistic, but you don't get that acceleration, perhaps, of progress that you see. I'd have to go through this and think about it. There's a few books over here comparing Eastern economics with Western economics, but it is interesting to think if perhaps some of that Faustian bargain has something to do with the subject-object divide, and then where the logical end of the subject-object divide is just determinism. Because if indeed, it's more like maybe, what you could say, and everyone can disagree with what I'm saying. I'd be curious what people think. We always look for like free will, right? We look for like free will in the individual. Well, if there is no subject-object divide, there's not really free will, just free situations. The freedom is in the interaction of the subject with the object in the entire situation. And to the degree it is indeterminable is to the degree we think thoughts that are abstract and not directly stimulated by the environment, which then directs the unfolding in an unpredictable manner or something that's indeterminate. So you would get sort of a whole situation that is then indeterminate. But the problem is they keep looking for quote unquote free will in the individual. And then the last problem I have with that, why can't they predict what I'm going to do in 1 minute? Like if we don't have free will, I would expect us to be able to like predict what we can't even get the weather right? Like we can't even predict the stock market. We can't even figure out what a given person is going to do 2 minutes from now unless we give them a very contained, closed system of choices. Like if you don't give people options and you're just open system predict what they're going to do in 2 minutes from now, we're not able to predict it, it seems. So I would really like that would be a really strong piece of evidence in favor of determinism if we were able to consistently predict what people are going to be able to do in 2 minutes, as opposed to say what they'll do is they'll say, well, if you had a head trauma when you were a kid, there's a 30% chance that you're going to end up in jail or something like that, right? Or if you had, if your mother was stressed when you were a fetus, Splowski will talk about this, and this is true. If your mother was undergoing stress when you were in the womb, you are like 60, it's something like 30% less likely to have the ability to control your emotions or something like that, right? Okay, well, that just shows you there's no subject-object divide, that we are conditioned by the environment. And also that means 70% of people don't have that problem. So yes, there's a higher probability, but there seems to be indeterminacy part of that very percentage, right? So it's like a lot of these experiments to me that show that there's no free will are actually just showing that that we're conditioned by the environment and the environment conditions us. I mean, don't we know in physics that like the brain filters reality into 3-dimensional / 4-dimensional space, right? Don't we know that there's all these kind of ideas that reality is actually like an illusion more so because the brain filters experience? Oh, funny enough, they're telling us that the subject is conditioned by the object, but wouldn't that mean the object is conditioned by the subject? Therefore, it's a two-way street in different ways. And then the very way we condition the environment then causally impacts us, which then causally impacts the environment back and forth, back and forth. Like the Splowski arguments against free will would only work if we don't simultaneously condition the object and if we can't add ideas to our environment that we are then reacting and responding to. So I wonder if all of those, because when I think of the West, it is very, and I wonder what it is about Western thought that heads into this kind of deterministic way. I wonder if it's part of the subject-object divide, and I wonder if we can think that with the Faustian bargain. And then if things like beauty, like Mr. Jockin's work, can help us come out of that problem. So beauty could be, well, then beauty is something we can add to our environment that we then respond to, that then, like if you're able to condition your awareness to experience more beauty, that right there means you're changing how your environment stimulates you. And so then you have free influence into it. So then the fate of beauty is the fate of freedom in that way. But let me pass it to Mr. Thomas Jockin. As you can see, I've been going down a rabbit hole with the Splowski book. So anyway, Mr. Jockin.
I mean, you're going to hook me in. Once you introduce me and bring in with the beauty stuff, Dimitri, good to see you too. I appreciate the background Zoom background. I definitely know where that's coming from. Good marketing. I appreciate it. I think actually one of the most important things you find out about the beautiful, right, is this idea of, I use the term a lot, receptivity. So this is very much in alignment with this kind of beauty doesn't really happen unless there's a receptivity of stressors, pressures, a responsiveness, kind of a contingency, a response to the contingencies we find at a particular time and moment, which draws that when there's a kind of fittingness, right, of that particular moment, there's a kind of striking of, basically that's what a lot of language of beauty talks about, the kind of individuated strike of reality. The example I always use is that it's not sunsets in general as an abstraction that are beautiful. It's this sunset at this moment, etc. It's not acts of charity in general abstractly that are beautiful. It's the particular act of charity in this moment, in this circumstance, etc., etc. I think actually I know from Dimitri, right? That's when I kind of piggyback on what's talking about. I missed the very beginning, but just I know from Dimitri about Hegel and the end of art, philosophy, and religion. And he made a note, I think I call it a hearing about measures shaping the world. There's a really interesting distinction when we look at how things are measured, the quantitative of the world. There is a difference between geometry and algebra. And a very subtle, I think it's an area I'm getting more and more interested in. What I mean by that is geometry is always demonstrated. It's explicit. It actually has an enactment over time, right? Which is very different from an algebraic kind of, I think this anonymous recursion loops would be the example of it. There's a big difference between spiral growths of a kind of, say, a golden mean, basically a high generation growth of living objects, which do happen over time, that self-replicate in self-identifying refractals, right? Versus a recursion loop. They're both acts over time, but their qualitative mode of a quantity is very different, isn't it? And I think that point about perfectly useful recursion loops are fantastic. I love my internet. Lots of great things from that. But where you're getting, I know Daniel's a pet project of yours, you know, this kind of the collapse of time into space can just as easily be converted the other way, right? And I think there's very big why that one direction, not the other, the Bergson argument, right? It seems quite arbitrary to make the call, and especially when a topic, the kind of question of time as a moving image in and of itself, I think again draws out that point, I think very powerfully. And I think it is absolutely true. I was just reading an article about a lot of the Industrial Revolution and the growth of the Enlightenment was ideas of measurement. How we measure things are images of the world. We depict the world by our measurements. And by those depictions, we act on the world. I mean, and that's why I bring this up, is that this question of, usually the question ultimately, not just of how we want to shape the world, it's a question of what is measured. I bring this up because I'll close on this. I put a thing on Twitter of, you know, my design educator peers. I asked, like, you know, God, I threw it out there. Guys, is there a reason? I just presumed because I knew it was true. When was the last time we talked about virtue in a design class? Even the one colleague of mine who said he does talk about it, I privately, he DM'd me, he showed me his syllabus. I have to talk to him about it. He has a line where he does say, like, you know, this class does presume we're pursuing excellence, but he has a really interesting line. How nevertheless, for the sake of grading, we will be using objective measurements of attendance and did you submit the paper? There's not, and the argument justification is that we're going to be doing things that are going to prevent bias and are objective. That is not virtue. You showing up and you answering a checkbox, an arbitrary checkbox, did you submit the paper on time or not? That is not virtue. Absolutely not. I have a lot to talk to him about. And I find it fascinating, the language he used about it, about talking about making sure that it's objective and unbiased. That there's no basically unsubconscious bias. There's a lot of talk about that kind of stuff. I find it very fascinating. That is very clear, even though he presumes, he's saying this colleague is presuming, he states virtue is part of his curriculum and talking about in design criticism. But in the very act of the measurement of the participation in the class, there's nothing about virtue being measured. Or certainly not, we definitely, actually, you know what, I'll qualify this one statement. I'm paraphrasing what he said in the syllabus, but he does say, we are pursuing excellence, but nevertheless, for the sake of grading, it cannot be measured. I find that fascinating. And that is not the mode. That Plato would never agree with that. Aristotle would never agree with that. The whole argument of the golden mean, right, is a complete challenge of that argument of you cannot measure virtue. Anyways, I'm going to close with that.
It's magnificent. So a few things. One, I'm now have a note here because I've never done a deep dive on Spengler, and now I'm wondering if it would be fun to do Spengler, Howe, and Hegel and Belong again too. So thank you, Dimitri. That's wonderful. Also, too, like, it's actually quite shocking how there is not an agreement on what matter is, and yet we know determinism's true. Like, we don't even agree on what matter is. So how can we be so sure determinism is true, right? Like, the other thing too is, like, literally, to have space be fundamental in time relative to space, we are now in a world where we need multiverses. Okay, maybe there are multiverses. Like, to redeem the theory, you have to really venture out there, right? Beyond the bounds of what would constitute science. Maybe it's true, but we're now bordering on science fiction. The thing that's shocking is you have people like Lee Smolin, who is a brilliant man. I think he's in his 60s now. He has Parkinson, but he's an incredible individual who basically goes through and shows you there's just as much reason to believe that space, that time is fundamental, not merely a dimension. Well, if time is fundamental, then you don't need the multiverse. You just have to have all of the universe have a contingency. Now, it gets kind of where he goes through, and basically it has a lot to do with what black holes are. But the whole point is the following. For space-time to be the case, you have to go into the multiverse direction. Maybe it's true, but you know, the time-space direction could be true too, and you don't have to go off into science fiction nearly as much. Maybe we ought to try that, but we're not. We're really, really, like, devoting all the money toward the space-time direction, which, if it's true, brings with us determinism and stuff like that, and also I'm not sure what it means, but if time-space is fundamental, like the thing Smolin gets at is there's all sorts of problems that you can kind of fix once you make time fundamental. So we ought to take that quite seriously. But of course, that would also have us move in the direction of being more geometrical. And algebra would always have to be service in geometry as opposed to being able to reduce the world down into something like a Platonic mathematics. This isn't because algebra is not useful. The big Leibniz-Descartes debate was, Leibniz was like, Descartes, algebra is a map. It's a very useful map, but you must not confuse the map with the territory. You must always place it in geometry. If you do not, you're going to get all sorts of trouble. That's going to happen. Likewise, space is very useful. No one wants to say we don't use space-time as a kind of map, but once you confuse it with the territory, you get in all sorts of trouble. But you see, I think what we see in the same way that there's this idea of dying to self, it's really hard to die to maps. Once you invest all sorts of money in theories of space-time, it's really hard to give up with it. Likewise, in capitalism, once you invest so many theories into ideas of market equilibriums, which don't seem to be true, it's really hard to give up market equilibrium as a foundation for capitalism, right? Because if you give that up, you have to start rethinking the basis of economics in ways that we've been talking about before, right? So it's almost like the thing we always have to realize with theory is you kind of end up with a Stockholm syndrome thing. That's what ends up happening. That's the problem with measurement. Measurement, like you can say the West came up with an incredibly useful map, the subject-object divide. That's a very useful tool. It's a very useful way to measure. The problem is it's so useful that it's really hard to say that it's not equal to the territory because you like it so much and it works so much and it seems great and you get a kind of attachment to it, right? Well, that attachment then is leading us into this kind of determinism that Splowski talks about, or the subject-object divide that tends to hurt the person and not lead to the holistic person in the way that we are describing, right? But that's the power of a Stockholm syndrome sort of thing. So the thing with maps is the reason we confuse maps with the territory is because of Stockholm syndrome in a kind of way. It's a kind of like that. We come to fall in love with the thing that starts to capture us. And that's where, like, the act of measurement, like, once the scientist uses the scientific measure, they themselves as a subject, this is Hegel's point, is transformed by the act of measurement. You know, there's that school of thinking Cadell is part of, where the guy is talking about he's interested in how a mathematician thinks. Sounds kind of weird. It's like, well, why would you be interested? He's like, well, because the way a mathematician thinks unfolds differently than how a biologist thinks or how an artist thinks. And so it's a school of measuring how different measurements for thinking affects the unfolding of thinking. And the argument is you really have to take that seriously if we're going to understand what thinking is and the legitimacy of, say, the ideas of the theories that come out. Because, well, and then the last thing I'll say, and then pass it on to whoever wants to speak, it does make me think of Ian McKilgerquest's idea that awareness is a really important choice, right? Like how we choose to be aware of reality transforms how it is toward us. But then the question is the following: by what basis do you choose how to be aware of reality? And so, like, for example, if you take we'll just say the Christian cross, it's made of atoms. It's also made of certain chemical composition. It's also a symbol, right? Okay, which of those is most real? Which of those vectors, to use Bard's language or Lung's language, or which dimension is most real? Well, McKilgerquest just says they're all equally real, and we choose our awareness. Well, that's a big deal then, because the way Michelle and I were talking about it in the Ivan Illich course is, you know, the duck bunny picture in Wittgenstein that's equally a bunny and equally a duck? Well, this just means every phenomenon is like a duck bunny with 12 different images in it somehow, different levels of awareness. How do you choose if it's a duck or a bunny? How do you choose what dimension is the phenomenon? It's equally all of them, just like Berdian's donkey, where it has equal piles of grain. So how do you make a rational choice? Well, every possible way of being aware of things are equally rational. And so how do you choose it? Well, you just do. And, I'll say non-rational. But then this is the critical thing. It is absolutely paramount for the human being to be able to move between awarenesses, right? To move between the different frames. But that's very unnatural because we tend to choose
and also
a mode.
not to become like schizophrenic while trying to do so.
It's also very difficult
also
on the subject. That's exactly right. It's very difficult to do it and confusing. which would require a new kind of thinking. And then Ivan Illich tells us that schooling is not education anymore. It basically reifies a certain mode of measurement and awareness. And if basically, this is what I sometimes wonder about, and I'll give it to Jockin and then to you, Dimitri, is like, is the fate of the West tied to our ability to think in a manner that can move between modes of awareness? Because it seems like when I think of the Faustian bargain, what we did is we made a bargain for a new type of awareness, like the eye-subject divide. And then in making that bargain, kind of entered a sort of amnesia of the different ways to see things. And now we have to regain that memory. Now I'm thinking Menno from Plato or something. Like we have to regain the memory of multi-awarenesses. And I wonder in some ways if we can think of that, the fate of the West is tied to that. But let me give it to Jockin and then Dimitri. And we're not even going to think that if we don't believe in freedom, though, right? That's why determinism is such a problem for me, because you have to have the ability to choose between modes of awareness. But Mr. Jockin, please.
This reminded me a lot on Plato, specifically Phaedrus, a lot of that. These questions of which, so an idea of basically like that cross, right? There's different accounts, ratios, that we can use to connect the thing from the name from the thing. So what is a cross, right? Is it arrangement of atoms? Is it a certain figure, composition, proportion? Is it basically part of Christian theology, et cetera, et cetera? All of those are equally valid. Those are all ratios, accounts, right? And now the question of which ratio is embraced or acknowledged or made aware of is actually a demonstration of that soul. It's not in the ratio is actually in one sense, that's the point. Is that if I had to summarize what I hear about the Faustian, to basically gamble, it put these things outside us. We are somehow this independent entity that gets to just reify the world around us, and there's no kind of penetration or statement about us. Thus, this is the traditional argument of why if multiple people come in disagreement about an account, that's somehow demonstrating the illogicalness of the accounts, of the situation at hand. That's not true at all. I would say it actually is a demonstration that different souls have different participation of accounts. This is an argument why experts exist. Yeah, some people are more attuned to certain accounts than others. And this is what the virtues of the science, the intellectual virtues are all about. That's what you're doing. You're shaping your soul to gain access to different accounts. The same cross or the same any object or entity or activity, in one level, when you do not have a certain ratio, you don't even perceive it. It's literally invisible to you. Do we say it doesn't exist? No, it does exist. It's just that you have no relationship to it. Not yet. But you may have a very dim participation with a certain account, and then a higher level is another. For example, water. I'll switch to another topic because I think it's more useful on this point. The account of a biologist is very different from the account of a chemist, which is very different from an artist, depending on this point. Each one of those are different accounts, and some of those are more useful than others in certain circumstances. And just because there's difference of accounts and people's understandings of it does not necessarily mean that it's irrational. It just demonstrates actually something about the souls in those moments, not the object. That'd be my argument categorically across the board. And by the way, even on the sciences, especially this kind of motive science we treat it as empiricism, it is all dependent on measure so much. If you don't have X-ray, you don't have stethoscopes, so much of it is dependent on measurement and observation. The power of observation is very different when you have to rely on your naked eye versus a telescope, versus a microscope, versus infrared sensors. You don't have those external artifacts of measurement. You do not get access to those realities. Do we say that ultraviolet magnetism doesn't exist just because we cannot perceive it normally? No, it does. That's another demonstration of it. We had to shape, that's an example of us extending our souls to gain more access to perceptions of accounts that we didn't have access to. I'm just drawing out these points because I think it's incredibly fascinating. And I would generally say, I usually, when the normal, obviously any topic of beauty, the general question, eyes, it's in the eye of the beholder. No, it's through the eye, right? It's not in the eye, it's through it. And what is it going through? It's going into our intellect, our souls, right? The soul is really the instrument. And I think Plato's huge project of virtue, why Plato cares about virtue so much, or Socrates really through the mouthpiece of Plato, put it that way, is because he understands that virtue's purpose is to shape the soul, to get access to these accounts. A soul without that does not have. I'm going to use a more advanced, a more Aquinas account, but when the irascible appetite has not been shaped to pursue the good, you do not have access to higher levels of virtue. If you don't have temperance and courage, you're not going to get, which is the alignment of the irascible appetite towards goodness, beauty, and truth. There's no way you're getting access to higher levels of reality. It's just, that's the requirement. It requires our souls to be shaped. And that Faustian bet, because this is my artistic interpretation of it, is the idea that our souls do not need to be changed. That education is not about souls being changed. That educators don't have to. I mean, my favorite example, I'm going to just riff on this last point. I was talking to a colleague of mine. So we're trained, basically she's been in the industry for 10 years. She's actually in the head of a university, but because it's a private institution, she didn't require a master's terminal degree. She has a bachelor's of fine arts in professional practice, but she's a working designer, right? In a high level, basically. That private education firm is closing soon. So now she's having to look for other employment. All the public schools are demanding this certification of MFA. But there are plenty of MFA graduates I've seen. Their work is nowhere near. And I've noticed when I've talked to educators, this idea of exemplar demonstration, that you as the educator must exemplify the excellence you demand of your students. It's like foreign to them. They don't understand I find that fascinating because there's this weird abstractional.
Wait, what do you mean by this? Can you repeat what you just said?
Yeah.
It's not clear to me.
So when in education, design education, almost all of your public universities are demanding that you need an MFA, which is considered a terminal degree in our field. That's not always been the case. Up until a generation ago, I'm at the edge where this shifted. You could basically at best have a bachelor's or be completely self-taught, but because of you're working in the industry, your work was a demonstration of your justification to be an educator. Right? Because the idea is you're leading by example. Your work is a demonstrator of your excellence versus there's been plenty of people that I've seen that have gone through the MFA program, who've gotten these certifications, whose work does not exemplify excellence. They're just not the same level. But, and as a result, this is now maybe an inference point about that. The ones that are generally the self-taught or the ones who have professional careers and then go into teaching, who still produce work and generate work, so thus have this kind of model of exemplarism, where when we do our work with our students, we are basically either implicitly or explicitly stating, my authority to be your teacher is because my excellence of work and my professional success, and demonstrated through the work I generate. And because of that, we're producing assignments, and you should trust my expertise in interacting with your work because of that excellence I have. Versus, you should trust my opinion on your work because I have MFA. Even though their actual work, they haven't actually done professional work in maybe 15 years. Like, they don't have actually their justification of their excellence is not because they keep producing work that is at a high level and should be trusted in their wisdom because of that. No, it's because they have the certification. And that's their justification. And if we actually looked at their work, it's really not that good. It's not anything to really go home about. It's a pattern enough that I've seen. Just to articulate what I was saying. That's what I'm saying.
It's an excellent comment. Ivan Illich was big on the culture of certification contributed to the disablement of the society, and it also led to the growth of a professional managerial class that removed incentive to become creative and entrepreneurial, and as a result, capitalism has fallen into a lack of demand and wealth creation. So I'm quite critical of what I call the monopoly on credentials that the colleges basically have, and the notion that we judge by certification versus our own discernment, because our own discernment would require us to have virtue and skill and training, and why not just outsource that to institutions that set the standards, and it's not our fault. Also, if we're just determined anyway and don't have freedom, then we can't make those decisions, and we need the system to tell us what to think. It's a terrible thing. And Ivan Illich in schooling. Like, he's not against, like, people think, oh, he wanted to abolish public school. No, he wanted to remove the requirement that you had to go to school to be qualified to be a trash man or to be anything, because he's like, what that does is means that schooling basically has a monopoly, and it no longer has to judge ability or skill. It just has to judge if you get the marks, and that contributes to what he called disablement. And I think,
so what's the alternative?
Getting certification and having them, and having like one, you could have employment testing, basically, where if you're so good because you went to Harvard, then compete with the single mom who learned off YouTube and do better than her on the coding test, right? So you said, like, look, you don't get rid of the colleges, you just have them compete. You know, if you're getting such a great education, so like, for example, when you go to get the job for coding, it's not that we go, oh, you went to Harvard, you get the job. We say, oh, okay, you guys, who solves this quickest and best? Everyone is at play, right? And if Harvard is so great, then all of their students will get the job, and the single moms who learned off YouTube will not, right? But now you have competition. And basically what Ivan Illich is saying, we need to judge not people's, you could put it this way. You stop judging a resume and you instead judge a portfolio. You replace the resume with the portfolio. That's the big thing. But it's exactly what Jockin was saying. To have a society that seeks employment, et cetera, so forth, by a portfolio, you would have to have people who have the capacity to discern and to judge, and then have those virtues and different things. And then to have the bravery to make the judgment. That's the other thing. That's the big thing that people don't like, is putting their neck out there and saying, this is good, because what if everyone disagrees with me? Oh my gosh, I don't want to be seen. So there's all sorts of cultural and social incentives that lead to a biasing of the certification. And then what that does is, for Ivan Illich, it turns experts into an expert class. And that's when you actually are going to start losing respect for experts. And now you're in huge trouble. And that's actually what we've fallen into now. Like, people don't trust the expert class, but then they start to not care about expertise. Oh, crap. Now we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Now we've got a real problem. But Ivan Illich said that's what's going to happen. Like, if you create an expert class on terms of certification, you're gradually going to train people to not believe in expertise. And if there's something about craft and apprenticeship and expertise that is necessary for the soul to have virtue and thus be capable of choosing those different awarenesses or ways of gripping the world, if you will, then you're going to have a very disabled people. You're going to have people turning against experts. Then you'll have mediocrity. Then you'll have people who don't do the work to have the skills to handle the complex modern world. They will then be existentially overwhelmed and probably turn to strongmen. So these are all things that start to happen when you have this when you have a replacement of the portfolio per se with the resume. And that's a big thing for me in belonging again, too. And I really appreciate Jockin bringing up. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll give it to you, Dimitri, and then Mr. Jockin. I'm now thinking of the difference between having the virtue to pick different modes of awareness in the delusion schizophrenia that seems to be ontological. Because there seems to be an important difference here that needs to be examined. And there's a real sense in which, if we're going to handle pluralism and globalization, then we need more virtue than ever before to handle those different modes of seeing differences. And yet there's something about pluralism that brings with it the arbitration, like then morality becomes irrelevant to us, or it's replaced by law. So that would be a combination of the exact opposite of what you need. And the reasons for that hopefully come out in belonging again, but let me pass it to Dimitri and Mr. Jockin. Dimitri, please.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments about cultivating different types of awareness. And yesterday I was at a party, and then I said some things, and then everyone looked at me like I'm crazy. And I know why, because first of all, they're possibly right, because the people who tend to agree with me are also crazy, and the people who the people in power usually don't agree with me. Doesn't say that they are not crazy. I don't know what's happening there, but I'll leave that to the side. On a serious note, like, yeah, I realized, like, okay, you know, these they don't know what I'm talking about. And that was funny, because to me, like, I think it has to do, to me, it's I take inspiration from Hegel and Lacan, this idea of our constitutive unrootedness of the human being, the fact that we are, as a subject, intrinsically out of joint. And this is really not like where we can see this occur. It's not that we err and then this occurs, or we can see it occur, but we stumble upon the truth of ourselves. And there's if you know different languages, or if you grow up biculturally, or get into philosophy, or have like ways that you self-exclude from the community, which can be pathological, of course, there's a sense to which you can have a heightened awareness of this, and also of like the intrinsic I mean the way people play games, and like also the fact that they don't want their games to be exposed. And when you kind of like it's the thing is, like, when you expose a game, it can be a sign of friendship, for example, when you kind of undermine each other. But it's also there has to be a certain receptivity to that. Like I love the following procedure. I will explain it to you in detail because it's very short. I love when people, talk for a long time on any topic, to ask them a very simple question in 2 sentences that I know they don't have an answer to, just to see, like, how honest are you with letting me know that you don't have an answer to this. For example, asking a while ago, I was asking this leftist about, okay, you critique capitalism, that's all good, that's fine. You are communist, so what do you actually think we have an alternative, and what do you think that is? And then you get this idea of, what if we just all get like a little farm and start like being anarchistic or something? And well, to me at that point, it's obvious that you don't really know what you're talking about, because we cannot solve global issues with having our own little autonomous non-hierarchical farms, And so just be honest with that, like just you can just be honest with that. Like, you don't have to be ashamed of not knowing this. But then this this often occurs. So this but there, like, language is very interesting here, because I truly believe yet you cannot understand a culture without understanding a language. And when I talk English versus when I talk Dutch versus when I talk Italian or Portuguese, I truly feel like I've kind of a different personality in all of these different languages. I wouldn't say I'm totally a different person, of course, but my Dutch me is definitely different from my English me. And like, especially if I think about it in the following sense, like, when I talk English, when do I talk English, or when do I use the English language? Well, I read a lot of English philosophical works. I talk a lot about philosophy in English. So it's a language I use for a particular means. Whereas I use Dutch with people I know from daily life, my family and my friends. So it's also used for different means. Now, of course, sometimes I talk about philosophy in Dutch and sometimes also in English. I just have normal kinds of conversations. But there's an incongruency or discrepancy that I can witness in myself when shifting from different languages. And like, I truly believe that like fuck Hegelian universalism, I truly believe that, or like, no, not fuck, like Hegel himself was maybe not so universalist after all. Like, the German and the Dutch language are inherently philosophically superior. You can say whatever you want, but it's I really believe it's true. And they're like, the etymological power in these languages is quite immense. I can give, I guess, a few examples. So the way that so victim in Dutch is slachtoffer, which literally means a victim of the slaughter, or things like addiction is verslaving, which is literally translated to enslavement, as well as like the etymology of friendship and freedom is linked to each other. And also the way we talk about the soul is very peculiar. The thing is again that I mean I can enumerate kinds of things, and then you guys maybe have to take my word for it because you don't know the language, which of course like kind of negates the whole point that I want to make. And this is the thing about language, like this interlinguistic void of like this fact that you some things you just cannot express in English, or some things you just cannot express in another language. Like when you try to communicate that, that's yeah, it's quite awkward. And to me, I always get a certain kind of like, you know, I think Cadell Last is a very interesting case study here because this man, he like, I mean, Daniel, you too, like you guys, I believe you also only talk English, right? Right, like you guys only talk English and you write in English, and then I could say, yeah, Daniel, but you don't know German, so you don't know the true depth of Nietzsche. But of course, you know, there's something in me that finds this ridiculous and pretentious and elitist. But on the other hand, when I read Nietzsche in English, there's there is a reduction there for sure. There's a reduction there. So then what's the answer? To become paranoid? And when I read Plato, be like, oh my God, do I get the right translation? Oh my God, how many translations do I have to read? You know, do I have to study Greek now? And even then, you know, is it then right? Or I mean, you could go further, of course, like with Asian philosophy. Like, is it actually, did Aristotle actually say this? You know, did he actually say this? Well, no, it was written by another guy many years after him. So there's always this argument, and I think the ultimate solution here is really kind of an affirmative naivete, like just to kind of accept the fact that it is already out there on the surface. Or in other words, like I've been, you know, recently I will tell you something. So this Dutch philosopher that I just mentioned at the beginning, I just finished another book by him last week. The day after, I was walking my city, randomly decided to go to a bookstore, and I saw him there standing with his wife. That was crazy. I knew he lived in the same city, but I thought maybe I will see him. But there he was, and then I spoke with him, and that was very nice. But reminded me of the Jungian concept of synchronicity, the idea of meaningful coincidence, because it definitely felt like it was meant to be, you know, like of course this happened, it had to happen, that's how it felt. But I don't buy this, and I don't want to get into probability. You know, probability to me, I also like when you talk about freedom and things like that. It's the moment you start mentioning probability, you get rid of philosophy, or like, you know, there's a certain kind of metaphysics to all kind of probability, and to reduce choice or freedom to like what's the probabilistic chance, or like there's so many factors involved we cannot know. I don't buy this argument. I think it gets boring very quickly. But yeah, no, it's still, there's like I don't want to go new age, but the whole concept of synchronicity still kind of interests me. And I was trying to see like what would Lacan say about synchronicity. Of course, I didn't find anything, which is a bit sad. But I guess something that Lacan would say is that by mere chance or like contingency, it happened, and it turned out to be in touch with your object cause of desire, object A, which to me is again like is kind of a boring answer. And it's like too self-evident, too familiar. Yeah, and you know, another thing on the, you know, my schizophrenia comment, I'm super interested in psychosis, and I've been reading some Philip K. Dick, who is like a psychotic science fiction writer. Daniel, have you heard about him? Yeah, of course you've heard about everything. The day I mention a name that you don't know, that will blow my mind. But anyway, like Yeah, Philip K. Dick has loads of short stories, and I was reading this one short story about this guy who discovered a book in his home, and he was reading that he took her arm, and then her eyes were following him. So he's like, oh God, like these kinds of aliens can like get rid of their arm and have their eyes pop out and follow each other across the room. So it was like, to me, I'm interested in this kind of text because it shows really the mechanism of psychosis, in which like messages in a deciphered way are transmitted to you, and there's a personal resonance there which you feel like you cannot communicate to others. And is this also not like how philosophy works? Like you cannot communicate it to others, it's a deciphered message, you're trying to tarry with it, you have a lot of affection for it, or there's a lot of affective power to this, to philosophy itself. Not saying philosophy is psychosis or something like that, but yeah, it's definitely interesting that the philosopher is always self-excluded, and this is also where the power, of course, of philosophy comes from.
That's marvelous, Dimitri. I'll give it to Jockin. So a few things just come to mind quickly. First off, I think you just pointed out why language is a mode of awareness as well. And it seems like art, history, philosophy, Hegel's categories, and language, one of the reasons why these seem to be so important is because they're the revelation of the choice of awareness, or the choice of account that Jockin was pointing at. And that's why they seem to be kind of special. Because like you were speaking about, I always do think that the German ability to take words and turn them into compounds quickly is quite unique. And that helps you move beyond the subject-object divide, and also helps you not be so bound by language. In Chinese and Arabic, they tend to hear musical notes that, English people don't hear because of the sophistication of the language. That also suggests different awareness. I'm actually of the opinion that if you do English, you must also do creative writing, because English has a tendency toward pragmatism, and it has a tendency to like remove nuanced terms for blue and just say blue. People don't use Azura, Serline, or whatever, just says blue. There's something about English that condenses, and you have to fight against that, and creative writing, I think, can help with that. I actually did take sign language for like 2 years, so I do ASL, and I really like ASL because it closes the language. You know how there's a signifier, signified gap when you like read a word? In sign language, for me, it's fascinating because it closes that gap a lot, and it turns language into something you apprehend as a moving image. And that to me was like the most profound experience of language, because then I tried to think about philosophy in terms of sign language, which then made it very phenomenological, made it very aesthetic, made it very artistic. And then I brought it together as well with short story writing, poetry, and different things. And the big one was when Samuel Beckett said about James Joyce that he was trying to make in Finnegan's Wake the word water drip. He was trying to make the word dance itself dance, ergo close the signifier signified gap. And there's something about poetry that tries to do that. And then, and it's also the revelation that you need poetry and language to keep language from becoming enclosed on itself. Language has a tendency, and maybe especially English, to close off concepts to just the language. Yeah, there is no difference between Serline and Azure. There's just blue. The language becomes very condensed. And what happens is poetry can break that apart, just like art can help break that apart, to kind of opening your awareness so that your language doesn't do your awareness for you, per se. And I think like design, art, literature, all of these things can keep the language from doing your thinking for you, which might be specifically, I'm not sure, I've never written this paper. I do wonder if there's something about English that is particularly in need of this opening it up, whereas other language, maybe in their grammatical structure, are more likely to remind you that the language cannot do your thinking for you, per se, because it is more malleable. Certainly sign language did that for me, because you can literally use the same sign, but the speed you move your hands and the look on your face can transform the meaning of it. So the performance, so every single word is actually changeable in the same sign by the performance of the word. And so the sign is not limited to a single definition, because the same sign in a different presentation and a different bringing together of other signs can transform the entire experience of it. So to me, that was very profound. And I do wonder, well, what do they say? English is the language of business, right? There's something very fast about it. There's something very efficient about it. But that might be particularly why English needs things like poetry and creative writing and so on. There's more to say, but let me give it to Mr. Thomas Jockin. Mr. Jockin, please.
It's funny. I mean, it's funny saying this because this is basically my introduction lecture on typography, language made visible, right? And that act of my project is basically to move students from treating writing and language communication as this just transparent given, right? That they don't even realize has all this modality built within it. So you're basically giving my introduction lecture in my typography class, Daniel. So very good on that. I think this idea specifically that exactly there are different kinds of measurements. Language is 100% a measure. It's a qualitative measure. That's what it is. Not only as Dimitri said, the different languages have different effects, right? Even within a language, the choice of saying azure, right, versus blue versus crocrillion, like, eggshell blue, like, the discipline in the arts is to know those differences, like to actually apprehend those differences, because it is true. I mean, at a certain level, and you brought up exactly in Arabic and Chinese music, there are different frequencies and tempos and pitches that are not perceptible to the Western tradition of music. It's just the facts of it's the facts of the ground. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think a matter of that's just the reality. It's as you said, at the very beginning. These are all maps. These are all maps, and we conflate these maps, which are images, as the reality. So it's the classic reality image tension that's all over the place. I mean, I gotta be honest. My work with this Plato lecture series I'm working on has basically led me down on an almost obsessional state where I'm like, what the fuck is not an image? Like, what is not an image? I'm kind of running down the route, guys, of just concluding the only thing that's not an image is God. Everything else is a God. Everything else is an image, which is a little bizarre to end up in that position. I was also having a talking about, is everything just soul? I mean, these are just questions I'm sitting here. Thus is kind of like object-subject distinction questions. Anyway, these are more just random side notes of my thought. Dimitri, your point, is philosophy sometimes schizophrenic? Oh, it absolutely can be if you do not ground to reality. Yes, which is the definition of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is when the phantasms in the mind and the inferences that come from that are not mapped to reality. Like that's basically, there's a loss of connection.
But who are you to say what is reality? That's what we need philosophy for.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that's the recursive paradox.
Yeah. And then that's the problem, is that once you realize that given of what you think reality is actually not so clearly articulated and not really that well known, oh boy, and that's the conclusion. Thus you're like, well, wait a minute. The only thing that can answer that question is guess God. But then even then that's the question, is God being? I'm not totally sold on that. Like in the sense of basically, does being exhaust God? I'm not totally sold on that position. Some people say yes, basically that God is the full activity of being, like it's full act, right, of being. I'm not totally sold on that. I think I'm more of a Dionysian argument that God is super essential. Like it's the circumscription of being is not enough to cover what God is. It actually goes beyond that, which is insane. Anyways, Dimitri, I want to point out something. Your notes on synchronicity and why you're not really that happy with Lacan's point. Jung had a really interesting point about synchronicity. He had a paper about it. He wrote a book about it. He talked about synchronicity as the acausal connection of things, which is a really interesting point, because generally the reason I think you're not that impressed with the kind of argument of basically Lacan of the good is the mode of desire, right? Because the good is a mode of desire. And it's just basically, you're just connecting. And that's kind of Jung's point too. It's basically like connection in the mind. You're just connecting it together. But what I like about this synchronicity is the acausal connection. It's a kind of, in a sense, when at the very beginning, I said what beauty is the kind of occasioning at a particular moment of a fittingness, of receptivity of the object and subjects in that moment together, responding to one another The beautiful is the beautiful because it does not it's not a necessary connection, yet it is. It is the case. It happens, and it happens through time. Music is a classic example of that. Any mode of harmony or beauty in music is these notes are just falling into place at particular moments. There is no causal connection between the one choir singing in one pitch, the trombone singing in another. It just so happens they're in synchronicity with each other to create a harmony. So it's actually it goes. This is why I'm one again. These are my more hot take moments. You would have to argue with me about this, as I'm not convinced that the beautiful is the good. I'm not convinced. I think the beautiful goes beyond the good, because the good has this kind of circumscriptional mode of connection. The causal relationship is that this is good for me, for some desire. Yet the beautiful actually kind of goes beyond us, in the sense that it actually is a desire piercing us, as opposed to us going towards it. Kind of building these points. But I think absolutely the kind of idea that usually the beautiful, I also bring this up because generally when, let me put it this way, when we work of fiction or work of art that has a too strong of an ideology, it kind of robs its beauty. And when people say, oh, this is beautiful, it feels like a counterfeit statement of the beautiful, because it's really the good. This is pleasant to me because it's good to my ideology, like kind of wokeism, things like that.
I have a question. So
yes.
if the beauty penetrates us, let's put it like this, why, the very simple question, why do we all have different music tastes? And can one type of music be like horrid to one's ears, where
our souls are different? We have different souls. We're shaped differently. Like our souls are attuned. We're instruments. Our soul's an instrument that it's attuned to be receptive to certain piercings versus others.
Right. And you don't think this negates the objectivity of beauty, if that's what you're saying?
Quite the opposite. It's what I mean, it's the same argument. Okay, we're not physicists, we're not statisticians. If you got presented some mathematical formula that is imperceptible to you, like you see there's marks on a board, for example, but you have no way to understand its meaning. Does that negate the truth of that formula? No, it doesn't. It says everything about you, that you're ignorant. Your soul has not been shaped to apprehend the accounts. That's all that means. It's an incrimination on you, not on the thing. That'd be the argument, the response to that. A lot of argumentation that usually the measure of someone being a real expert, attunement to music, for example, they find pleasure and beauty at a higher and higher ratio of frequency. Yeah. So us dum-dums can only handle a 2/4, a 3/4, maybe a 6/8. We find pleasure in those. But once the frequencies get too high in their number, 128 to 256, they become dissonant to us. The argument is made that it's been measured to show that, it's been demonstrated in papers to show that people of higher musical training find more beauty and harmony in higher and higher levels of ratios. So obviously, again, the argument probably be, the statement is generally made that God finds all things beautiful, because even the most lacking thing has beauty, because God actually is the one to apprehend. God sees it all, even if we don't see it. So again, this is Dimitri on these points. So I can point on the idea of the truth, right? That mathematical formulas, us not having the account of the sciences to understand that formula, for example, or that phenomenon, does not say anything about that phenomenon not being true. It says everything about us being ignorant about that point. That we need certain instruments to even apprehend these phenomenons. Again, points to a fault in us, not in reality external to us, but very much that we participate with it. It's an attunement question, and our souls need to be shaped to become attuned to it. That's true. If that's the reality of the truth, it applies just as much to the good, that quality, and then I just in the same argument on the beautiful. Like I find I'm not convinced if we accept that that's true on the truth, property of the truth, that's valid. I don't see any reason why that's not true also for the good, because there are certain people who have again, if our soul's not shaped to apprehend. An example I always use, I was talking to the Lithuanian Free Market Institute about this on Thursday. It is a moral choice what one spends one time to do. It is a moral choice, and it tends to be the case that that wisdom is generally a time bias, time preference that is long-term and enduring in time. Those tend to be good acts. And acts that are short-term, self-interested, and short in duration are bad acts. That just because people choose bad decisions, because they have bad time, they make certain time preference choices that have moral consequences, does not mean just because people make different choices does mean there's not moral reality. There's a moral reality outside that acts upon us that we attune ourselves to or not. And there are consequences to it if we choose or not to. So if the good and the true both meet those standards, then the beauty, I think, absolutely stands in the same position. And that's presuming that they're all co-equal. What I make the argument, this is my more hot take, that I think it actually it's a higher level. That I think actually that the good is higher than the truth, and the beautiful is higher than the good. But that's a super hot take. That's not consensus to. I would have to do a lot of argumentation. I'm not even prepared yet. That's gonna be my life project, basically. But Dimitri, just kind of, you can challenge me on this, by the way, Dimitri. But I just want to build on my argument.
There's a shortly I have a point, because Hegel's science of logic ends with the three ideas, which are his takes on like the most concrete logical forms. I think that's fair to say. And he starts with the practical idea, then he goes on to the theoretical idea, and then to the absolute idea, which he also calls the logical idea. And in the practical idea, there's this striving to attain the good, let's say, in practice. Whereas in the theoretical idea, there's also a striving to attain truth, of course, with cognition and thinking. Now, the absolute idea is actually the sublation of the theoretical and the practical idea, which are always stuck in this kind of striving and postponement and that never really attain their goal, whereas the absolute idea does. And I think the absolute idea is the beautiful, basically. This is which he calls so I think Hegel would agree with your point, to go very quickly through the argument. No,
I mean, shit. Let's build. I mean, I'm not again. Hegel is my weak point. I have not read Hegel, so I can't make a comment.
No one has. You have to die.
No one has.
Once you die, you can claim you've read Hegel, but you have to die.
Hegel, on that note, I was going to comment. I mean, listen, Thomas Aquinas is very clear about this. In heaven, it's the beatific vision.
Yes,
it's not the good vision. It's not the true vision.
So there's a few things. Everything you're saying is very, very important. Okay. The way I think about it. So there's a few. First off, on the image question, I've mentioned him a few times. One of my favorite thinkers is a man named Austin Farrer, wrote a book called The Finite and Infinite, and he goes through the debate between basically Protestants and Catholics on the idea of the analogy of being. Is it heresy? Is it not? And he does some extraordinary work. But I just want to note him because I think he's relevant here. Also, to what you're saying about music and beauty as attunement, I completely agree. I call it conditionalism. You have to meet certain conditions in order to experience things as beautiful. It's the same in literature. If you don't meet the condition of being literate, you can't read frickin' Tolstoy. And literally books through training that you once hated. My favorite example is The Sound and the Fury, which is now one of my favorite novels. I absolutely hated it when I first read it. And then you meet the condition, you work, and you apprehend it differently in different things. Also, too, on the question of what is reality, Dimitri, I know that CTU guy, Chris Langdon, I can't think of his name, and some other people say this, that reality is the movement to know reality, the movement itself to try to know reality as the constituting principle. Like it's the movement of reality into its own knowability. But then, of course, that knowability is actually only full in beauty, if we go with the logic that we're showing. Reality only knows itself fully as it moves toward the beautiful. Now, the reason why I do think beauty, there is a hierarchy. So there's a weird, and I think Dante follows this as well, actually. So you have the true, the good, and the beautiful. So you start in the true, and it seems like, hey, is this a pen? You can condition people to believe there's truth by basing just kind of facticity. Okay, now that you believe in truth, do you think this is good? Do you think the pen is good? Well, the good can't be located in the facticity. Now I'm conditioning you to kind of think beyond the facticity, right? It's like, is there some kind of truth to goodness? And it's like, well, maybe it's good because I can use it to write on paper. I can have ideas that I otherwise could not. Oh, okay. So you're starting to see how the pen can be used in a good way relative to its telos and ends, and we have to get on that. But then it's like, now what would be the beautiful way to use the pen, right? It does not seem as if you could answer the question, how is the pen beautiful, before you work through the truth, like knowing what the pen is, knowing what's good to use the pen, and then what's the beautiful use of the pen. It would definitely seem as if beauty is the highest part of the process, because doing something beautiful with the pen doesn't seem possible until you know the truth of the pen per se. Now, I'm not reducing truth to facticity, but there's something, because this would just apply to anything in different ways. It seems like you have to know what the thing is, then know the good way to do it, and then master the good way to do it in order to do it in a beautiful way. So it definitely seems like beauty is the highest part. And here's the trick. Once you get to beauty, you still have to keep with it the truth of the pen and the goodness. If you ever forget the goodness, then you lose them all. So once you get to beauty, it's as if they're equal, but it's more so that they're all with one another. This is the tricky thing. There seems to be a difference between with and equal, right? And it's that in beauty, beauty is with good and truth. Dare I say a kind of Trinitarian structure. It's all different, but oneness kind of thing, right? It's like, but beauty is the highest in the sense that let's put it this way. Beauty is the highest because it's the point at which all three can be with one another. Like, that is why it's the highest, is because you can't have at just goodness, truth and beauty at just goodness. It's only at the top that you can have all three together, per se. And so the confirmation of beauty as the highest is the fact that it's only at beauty that you get all three together, or can hold all three together. So that's why beauty is in a way higher, because it's only at beauty that you can have all three. And that's the kind of weird move where they in a way are interchangeable, but they're also not. And so there's a hierarchy, and yet there's a community or a relation that sort of emerges at beauty. And that's the tricky thing that's really hard to think. I'm no pseudo-Dionysus expert, but I think he aligns with this. I think with the kind of idea of the heavenly hierarchy, there is this law. Well, then what that would all mean then, if it is in beauty that you also get good and truth, whereas in just good, you might get truth, but you don't get beauty. And in truth, you might not get good and beauty. Then the key awareness or mode of account that education should be in the business of is conditioning people to experience the beautiful, because it is only there that they can get all three of those together, which I absolutely think aligns with Hegel, 1,000,000,000% on the absolute idea. Then that's the height. And it's only in the conditions of experiencing the beautiful that the soul has the virtue to handle different accounts and to move between different accounts in the way that you were saying, Mr. Jockin. Like only the soul that has been conditioned to the place to experience the beautiful as such, as the highest value, would then have the virtue to handle many accounts. So basically what this means is that in a pluralistic, diverse world, the education of the beautiful becomes insanely important, and yet this seems to be when we teach it less. Like this seems to be when we teach it less. Mr. Jockin, please.
No, build on that, because Aquinas is I opened my lecture course series on Plato with Aquinas. He has a section on honestinum, so honesty. And he actually points out that the honesty is both the expression of the totality of virtue and the beautiful, specifically spiritual beauty in the soul. And the way that it's talked about, it's that act of a soul that in a circumstance will say, it's almost, how has to put this? It's a mode of integrity where you basically are saying, what is the right thing to do? What is the beautiful thing to do in this moment? Which demands a kind of absolute love of truth and goodness at the same time. I'm kind of painting through that a little bit, but yeah, and actually, by the way, I kind of circled back to the question of accreditations and all this. I mean, the reason why we have this is because we can't trust each other. Right? Like the whole pretense of having accreditation so that we can trust that some external entity has objectively assessed that this person is qualified to be an instructor, to have this relationship with you, et cetera, et cetera. But if the givens of trust of that relationship have been violated or are not solid anymore, it's not honest. It doesn't have integrity, integral goodness built into it, basically. I'm just building on that point because I think that's actually, I will say, ultimately, it's kind of it is a question of scalability, really, in that sense, because that's incredibly rare. Like this kind of integrity of a beautiful soul that has this perfect virtue, the noble soul. Also, another thing too, by the way, I always love this in Aristotle. It's the kata alone. It's the beautiful good as the noble. So the noble, actually, and Dimitri, your point about language before, you know, it's not to say I would be a snob to say if you're going to talk about Plato, you should know Greek. I think you definitely need to go in and know the terms because I mean, my classic example. I mean, I know from my lecture series. So in Parmenides, if you read the English translations, it's like ideas all over the place. It's like the entire discussion about is the idea. But if you actually go to the Greek, it's only mentioned 3 times. All of it is eidos. All those times that it's translated as idea in English in the open source resources of it, it's eidos. It's eidos. It's not idea, which is form. It's a complete. It does change a lot if you go in there understanding what Plato is trying to do in Parmenides. When you understand it's really eidos being discussed, not ideas. So that's where knowing the Greek matters, is to get into those particulars. I said it similarly for Aristotle when he said when the noble, that word noble gets, you look at the Greek for it, is the combination of the kata of the beautiful good, basically put together, right? It's that kind of sensing of like there's something plus extra. There's something more than just goodness here. It's way more. Another example, by the way, is even in me and Critilis, where this idea of like the right word being used. It's the beautiful word. It's kalon. It's this word beauty is being used in very unusual ways that are English kind of morphing into correct, fitting, not even fitting. Fitting, I would accept it a little bit better, but well or correct. Does not capture the spirit of what is going on there when it's kalon instead being stated as the proper name given to the thing. It's a very different dynamic. So I don't know, I'm just going to painting out these pictures here.
So just today I was reading that, in Aramaic and ancient Hebrew, they wouldn't have spaces between words to save up, when they were writing on the tablet. So imagine if we have that with English, you could write God is nowhere together, and it would also is God is nowhere or God is now here. It's like diametrically the opposite. So this is that ambiguity never leaves us. And to make an addition to the point about this the praising beauty, is that we have to mention all the ontological scandals here. Like the absolute worst people can enjoy the most beautiful types of art, and can be attuned to the most beautiful types of art. Think about like how the Nazis used classical music, and how there were so many Nazis deeply into music. And of course, today I was thinking about it, like if you actually read intellectuals throughout the ages, or like spiritual mystics or whatever, like some of them are really supported horrible things. Just think about Luther, who supported the slaughter of the farmers because they were getting too radical. But you can also get into not mystics who supported Nazism, or like Suzuki, who supported the Japanese fascism. And like these, I wouldn't say these people weren't attuned to beauty, but maybe Plato has something to say about this in relationship to how he spoke of poets and the problems he saw with poets. Now, I'll just leave it there because I haven't explored that train of thought myself, but Plato was very, as you guys probably both know, very critical of poets. And there is this, yes. Just to make the last point, there's this saying in Europe that gets at the origin of evil. What is the origin of evil? And the answer is a beautiful woman. This is the origin of evil. Why? Because, if you're all at the gym and then, the woman enters, some beautiful girl enters, like everyone's focused on their grind and all the heads start turning and watching her. And this is something we have to think about. definitely, like this, the evil nature of beauty, and also the partial nature of the semblance, the breaching or breaking of objectivity, which also gets to love. You know, love as this breaking, this falling, this partiality, this ripping, this like abstract thing where you rip something out of the whole totality of reality and you say, no, it's this thing, like this meager human being who I know is imperfect, I love this eternally. Like the radicality of that in relationship to beauty and evil, and poetry. Yeah, it's interesting thoughts.
Yeah, it's the idea of seduction. I mean, that's generally the statement, the language about this, about the idea of seduction, right? That basically through paradoxy images, or basically anything that's out of any evil, is one way to articulate it, is the misproportion of things. So that beautiful girl is lovely, but when it's misproportioned to other things, then is where disaster happens. And that's generally the case. That usually what happens a lot with falsehood, there's elements of truth in it. It's just misproportioned or mispositioned or mistimed. I mean, any good act. I mean, I'll use another example, like the conjugal act, right? Like between a husband and wife, like done in a privacy of a house is different from doing it in public. It's the same act, same activity, but just a change in place and location completely transforms its dynamic. So I don't find that, I don't necessarily, that's the danger. I absolutely agree.
Well, I would say add to this, like the truth is in the misproportion. Like we shouldn't reduce the misproportion to like falsity and like let's not go there, because it's like yeah, when you're in this being hypnotized by this evanescent kind of appearance, that it's like there's an absolute emanation appearing through it. You see what I mean? Like it's easy to say it's misproportion, like should have good proportions.
No, my point is like, but I'm not sure we're disagreeing. I'm just pointing out, like, in terms of, I don't think that doesn't dismiss the reality of good, truth, and beauty just because of the existence of evil, which is again an issue. I think because you're getting at the question of like, can people who are like, it's the idea of attunement, right? That's what you're getting at. So part of the problem is people are misattuned because they put things in misproportions, or they present images that are misproportioned. It causes error, or it causes mistakes, or whatever, right? What you were bringing up before was the idea of like basically evil people or bad people enjoying beauty. You're asking that question. That was your original point. So what I was saying, I think I was getting at, these are again incriminations or pointing out about the person, not necessarily about the reality itself. I just bring it up because violations of these violations or errors or mistakes is more, let's put this. It's like when someone breaks the law, they still are aware of the law when they do it. Like it's an act, like in their act, it's almost when someone does a wrongdoing, they're aware they did the wrongdoing. So this is kind of, they actually still have a reference of the reality of the measure in which they're holding themselves to. That's kind of what I'm getting at here, or I'm trying to paint out here. So I actually don't think there's any issue per se if someone, basically the idea that this attunement necessarily doesn't have a guarantee that everybody's going to align to it or align to it perfectly. I don't think there's anything wrong. I think that's human nature. I think you can argue that from a theological point of view, a fallenness of man. You can do lots of different statements about that. It certainly does point out the problems of just politics. Like, again, like there's a reason why I've always loved this. I always said that Aristotle has two answers. He has two ethics on purpose. I don't think it's an accident he has two ethics. I think it's kind of intentional. The Eugenian ethics is phrasing for the noble soul that is attuned. It doesn't have these prophet distortions and errors to have to be corrected. The Nicomachean ethics is for the souls that are not corrected, and he makes it very clear. The purpose of the law is to shape the souls to desire to love the good and hate the evil, the base. So I don't really necessarily. I think that's basically kind of a question about the kind of secondary effect from ethics, which is the politics, because
what I'm fundamentally questioning is like if the beautiful is with the good and the truth and is kind of the highest in encapsulating them, then to put this forward, also comes with its issues, because you cannot just put forward beauty and get rid of evil that way. And the width is crucial here, what Daniel just mentioned.
Well, I'll jump in, not to interrupt. So there's a few things. First off, there's people who like, say, Wagner because of the cultural status it gives them to be seen as someone who likes Wagner. And it's not actually the beauty of Wagner that moves them, but the ability to claim we are the superior culture because we have more sophisticated music. So you have one question of sometimes evil, sociopath, whatever, will like the beautiful, not because they are moved by the beautiful, but because they are aware of the cultural status the beauty gives them, right? So you have that thing that could go on. And I think that's what Mr. Jockin is getting at, is when you have a lack of attunement, you have the things of beauty, but not the beauty per se. And it's actually a status thing. And I actually encounter that all the time in, say, literature departments with people who say, oh, yeah, I love James Joyce. But they don't spend any of their time doing literature. They only do it for assignments, right? So they're clearly, it's kind of it's a status thing. It's a hierarchy. People would say, oh, my favorite book is Finnegan's Wake or Infinite Jest, knowing that there's cultural capital that comes from that, right? And it's a terrible thing, because I think, you know, when the Bible says, for example, you have to give account of yourself at the end of the age, I like to think that means you have to explain how you use your free time, not merely if you followed all the moral rules, because I agree completely with Jockin that the choice of how you use your time is a moral act. And so I think we need to think about giving an account of ourselves more so as how we use our free time, not merely do we avoid crime or something. However, to your point, Dimitri, there's actually an incredibly fascinating line that one time made me write a really, really long paper in Dante, when he is toward the top and he says something like the following. He says, as I approach the wheel that turns the wheel, the beatific vision, he says, as I was drawn in, it occurred to me that had my eye turned away, I would have been astray. What he's getting at, now the entire poem has also suggested that the devil is the highest being, right? And the entire logic of the Paradisio is that beauty is pulling you in, okay? So here's the point. This is the argument I tried to make. If you get to the beautiful, where you have the goodness and the true, if you turn away, you fall big, because it's like, it's not merely like, if you get to the place of beauty, it is only the highest angel that can be the devil per se, because it is only the devil it's only Lucifer that has experienced that height of beauty that would put them in a situation that to turn away from that beauty, because its draw is so strong, their egotistical will to pull away from that would have to be incredibly powerful. And so the moment they turn away, they instantly have the ego that can pull away from that kind of beauty. Bam, they're Satan, just like that. And the argument I tried to make is that at whatever point in the Paradisio you turn away from beauty, you go to the corresponding layer in the Inferno, actually. That it inverts to its opposite, because the more you approach the beautiful, imagine a glass that's full of water, and the more you approach the beautiful, the more glass grows taller, and the more water it has within it. And if you flip the glass upside down, now there's a lot more emptiness than had you just flipped the glass down here. Do you understand what I'm saying? So imagine that again. You have a glass that the more you approach the beautiful, the more the glass gets taller and the more water it has within it. So then if you flip it, there's way more water that spills out. There's more emptiness. That's correct. So beauty, as you approach beauty, increases your capacity. It increases your attunement. But that means it also increases the horror of your disharmony if you will away from the beauty. And the point is, for Dante, the closer you get to beauty, the more the will egotistically have to really fight beauty to turn away. And that means if you successfully turn away, you're the extreme opposite. And so that's why, you know, when you get to beauty, where you have goodness and truth, you have to keep them together. But the will could separate them. And boy, howdy, if you do, it's a massive, massive problem. Like, I think there's an argument to be made that only saints can be the worst people in history. And that, like, that precisely capacity is when it is not rightly aligned, that it makes some of the worst people in history. Now, that has to be kind of expanded, but that's why in Bologna, again, we talk about Bonhoeffer.
Is there a right alignment? I think, Mike, what I'm questioning is the very idea of right alignment. Like maybe there is just this schism and that's all there is. What do you think about that?
Do you think that people can condition themselves to have more experiences of the beautiful? Because the alignment would not be a particular sort of mono, like the alignment would not be everyone likes the sound and the fury. The alignment would be the conditioning of beauty to particularly manifest relative to each individual soul, but you still have a harmony of a unified experience. Mr. Jockin, I think you want to say something, sir.
Yeah, I mean, just build on that. I mean, that's just, I mean, under that same argument, are you saying just because different propositions relate to different subjects, that there's no universal truth? That the truth is the same, like truth is the same in all of those statements of propositions, yet the actual particular subject and predication are completely different. It's the same argument. There's the proportionality, this kind of image is so that the conform the I know a lot of people don't like truth as the correspondence argument. A lot of people don't like it. They want to go aletheia, the opening, all this good stuff. But it is useful in this discussion to talk about the correspondence argument, because that's the point you're making, Dimitri, is that that there is one reality truth, but the particular expressions of those are on the particular subject predicates of propositions that conform to reality. They're not the same, they're different, but yet they all point to the same truth. They meet the definition of truth because of the conformity of proposition to the reality.
So okay, what if we go back to Daniel's what you just said about like Hitler pretending to like Wagner or something like this? I think the true tragedy, and I think this is actually the case, is that like there is actually, let's say, Hitlers who actually authentically, deeply in their core love Wagner. As an example, you know, like, so is this? Yeah. Maybe, the fact that beauty is beauty and is like you can have an attunement to that doesn't entail goodness of your person or something like you can go up like from like the the fact to the good to the beauty, but it doesn't mean that if you are at the beauty that's also the good.
There are a lot of propositions. I mean? No, I get what you're saying, but like here, I'll borrow from Aquinas on this. The cause of evil is goodness, like that from Aquinas. So thus, it's a privational argument. So the argument, what Daniel's building on, what Daniel's saying is that, so for example, the Hitler that loves beauty, like there is, I think what is fair is to say, just because the attunement towards the beautiful does not guarantee your soul stays there at all. In fact, actually, there's a greater danger. Actually, it's to use the Heidegger statement: the saving power is also the dangerous power at the same time, because you can basically attune yourself to the beautiful, but it's in that activity. You could completely invert it and go and become this horrendous monster. Basically, you actually have more capacity to do harm because of that. They kind of use an analogy. A lot of times, it's actually just that poor people are poor. I bring it up because if you give a poor person a drug addict, a bunch of money, in theory, you would think like giving them money would solve the problem, $1 million. No, it won't. They'll just keep doing drugs until they kill themselves or do some other variation. That's an example. If you basically provide them with, and you say being with power in that sense, you're actually harming that person. They can't handle that basically capital given to them, for example. It's the same argument, because there's actually a danger of that happens. Like, I think what you're saying, I think is fair, Dimitri, is that there's no presumption just because of this argument here that the beautiful will always shape the soul by necessity to be good and all that. Because quite frankly, we have free will, and it's also why the angels have perfect, again, a theological point of view. The angels have perfect understanding, and they fell regardless. They knew what would be the consequences of them denying God in different ways and modes. And that's not humans. Those are angels. They have far better intellects than we do. They don't have to think through reason. They just get all of existence all apprehended. Yet they still chose to fall. Satan is the classic example. Now, the argument is, based on which tradition you are, you can either say Satan chose to fall because he did not have, exactly, he was the most beautiful entity, but there was something higher than him. It was either Mary or Jesus, or Mary or Adam, one or the other. The Islamic tradition say it's Adam, where his fall happened because he refused to submit to Adam as the most beautiful being of creation. And I think for Catholics, and Orthodox, it's Mary who is said to be the most beautiful creature. It's a similar point. Lucifer had all the full understanding, and yet he chose to still turn away from it. Like it's more of a demonstration of basically freedom necessity requires that. So it actually demonstrates that this beautiful does not have a power of necessity. That's why it's a causal connection in the first place. Because necessity, like the kind of argumentation of cause and effect, is by necessity. But we're pointing out that beautiful does not have that property. It's something else. So it kind of paints that picture a little bit. But maybe you can challenge us on this.
I would just jump in, and so as you know, in the Quran, there's the idea that Iblis does not, bow to Adam because they are made of clay and we're made of fire. And some Sufi traditions say it's because Iblis is the true monotheist; he's only going to serve God. And there's also some Christian notions that God rebels against God because he loves God. And actually parodies like Milton gets in that, right? So you have an idea of the good come in conflict with the actual good. So this is the key notion. Because the question is, how could Lucifer fall if there's no evil and only good? Well, because it's possible for an idea of the good to come in conflict with the actual good, right? And so you have this. So this is how I would explain it. So I think, so you say you start in truth, then you move to good, and then you move to beautiful. In beautiful, it's possible to get beauty with goodness, with truth. We already established that, right? But that means it is only in the beautiful that it's possible to get beauty in conflict with the truth and the good because they're together. The greatest evil occurs in that place where good, truth, and beauty get in conflict of one another, which only occurs in the place of the capacity for beauty. Because so that's like when you get to the beautiful, if you will away, or like Lucifer or whatever, what is Lucifer doing? He's putting the good in conflict with the beautiful. He's putting his idea of what's true in conflict, because he's saying actually serving Adam would be to betray Allah, so I won't do that, right? Well, his idea of the true comes in conflict with God or the actual truth, and so then it all breaks. So this is the key, is like it seems like the human movement, because there seems to be a hierarchy and a togetherness and the possibility of a conflict. So the latter, if you give me that, seems to be truth, goodness, beauty. So then you get people to the beauty. And the higher up that ladder, there's still more fall that can occur, right? So greater capacity for evil, if you will. Likewise, greater capacity for good. When you get to the top, because beauty is so strong, then in order to put beauty and truth and goodness in conflict, you have to have a crazy strong will, right? In order to will against the beautiful. But it is clearly possible, because we see it with the angels and in history, to put good and truth and beauty in conflict, and that's when you get the worst evil. So it's in that realm of capacity that can occur, but it's only there that you can get that level of conflict. Now, in the realm of the true, you could put people's idea of truth in conflict with truth, okay? That could occur. Now, if you get to the level of the good, then you could put good in conflict with truth, and then truth in conflict with truth, and good in conflict with good. You could get that. But if you get to the highest, you have beauty in conflict with good, beauty in conflict with truth, beauty, goodness, all of those go there. And at the top, it seems like you basically are going to have to go in conflict with beauty in order to fall, because beauty is pulling them all together. So you would have to conflict with the mechanism of pulling them together, ergo the beatific vision. And if you do that, it's like a full cup that now inverts, and the amount of evil is extraordinary at that point. And so it's absolutely possible at the point of beauty to fall and to put it in conflict with the good and the true. And that way, like you have Lucifer in this story is a genuine monotheist. He genuinely loves God. The problem is he loves God through his idea of what it means to love God. Likewise, you have Hitler, who genuinely loves Wagner, generally loves it, but he puts it in conflict with the good and the true, because it's the German supremacy, right? It's not in a harmony with other souls or different things. There's a notion that there's one account that the soul should follow, and everyone should have that, as opposed to different modes of awareness, you could say, right? So you have this, but this is why life always has stakes. This is why life is a journey, because there are all these steps you have to make. You climb to the beautiful, and then you have to keep them together. And you better, because the stakes are really high. But it is possible to put them in conflict. So that's a way that I think about it, is that every level, when the true, at the good, it's good and truth. At the beautiful, it's beauty, good, and truth. But it's only at the beautiful that you can get all three together. So there's a sense in which beauty is the highest, because it's only in beauty that you get all of them with one another. But that means it's only in beauty that it's possible to get them in conflict with one another, if the will so chooses. So beauty is the highest point, but then potentially the worst point. But then what Dante is saying is, by God's grace, he's like really making it quite easy not to turn the will away, because it's so beautiful. So if you do, it's then just for whatever happens to you, because this is where the justice would occur. It's like there was so much grace pulling you in. If you willed against it, then if you face the inferno, it's like, well, that's just because, well, and then also in Dante critically, at that point, you are so married to your idea of the truth that the actual truth of God's love is torture to you. The flames of hell are actually also God trying to reach you when you don't want them, because you're so bent on your own idea. And that's where Lewis says that hell is locked from the inside. So you have all of these principles in operation at the same time. As we approach the end, because I will have to go in a minute, if we have any closing thoughts on going through the history of beauty, truth, and goodness, and theological ladders, and Satan, and Dante, I'm glad we could speak today. This has been a treat. So anyone with closing thoughts, please. And Mr. Jockin, the world looks forward to your class. It's going to be great.
Gonna be a good time. Dimitri, I agree. And by the way, I appreciate Dimitri throwing in some spice of those questioning points. I think I would want to point out that makes ideas much better when that happens. I don't know if you've been convinced or you actually feel, I mean, that's the point. I'm curious about that. But nevertheless, I did enjoy this conversation a lot.
Oh, yeah, those questions are hot. I mean, that's what you need. So thank you, Dimitri.
Yeah, I'm still in a questioning mode. I'm hysterical. I accept him.
Questioning is good.
Yeah.
All right, gang. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Jockin.
Thank you too, guys. I appreciate it.
This has been fun. Thank you all. I appreciate it.